Chapter 9. A Harsh Skipper. Although Chet had opened the capsule when he removed it from the pigeon, he would not reveal the contents to the Hardy. Instead, he waited as Frank removed the top. Inside was a tightly rolled bit of paper. Frank smoothed out the note. A message printed in block lettering read, "Caught L. About to squeal. Holding here. No deliveries until replacement arrives." Frank slapped Chet on the back. "Good work, old pal. This may help to speed up our case." As Chet beamed with pride, Frank turned to Joe. "I guess we'd better forget those pigeon farriers for the time being and concentrate on this new clue." They examined the paper to see if it held any further clues. Holding it to the light, Frank studied the watermark. "It looks like a fowl anchor insignia with several other figures that might be seahorses." "Look at this, fellas," he said. "The next step is to see if we can trace the origin of the paper." From a list in Mr. Hardy's files, they selected the best-known paper manufacturers and called them, asking if it belonged to a special customer. They were told in each case that the company would check and let them know. "Now, all we can do is wait," Frank said. The next day, the boys stayed at home all morning, but no telephone calls came from any paper manufacturers. At lunchtime, Joe said, While we're waiting, let's investigate that man Glenn Morgan told us about yesterday, the one who might be a ship's captain." "Okay, how about we try the Bayport waterfront again? Maybe the owner of that restaurant where we saw Ragu can give us some clues." The Hardys drove to the docks and headed for the eating place. When they questioned the proprietor about a tall, cruel-looking sea captain, he grinned and shouted to two men who were briskly eating at a table in the far corner of the room, "These boys are looking for a tall, cruel-looking captain, men. Either of you like to take the job?" "What's it for?" one asked. Then, laughing louder, he said, "A high school play?" Chagrined, the Hardys headed for the door. To their amazement, they heard the restaurant man remark, "The Hardy boys, their pop's a big-time detective. Hey, Zeke, we'll have to watch our step." Laughter followed the boys as they left. They visited other spots along the waterfront, but saw no likely suspects. Finally, they paused near a small fishing craft. A jovial-looking man called down to them from the upper deck. Are you the lads who are hunting for a cruel-looking skipper?" "How'd you hear about it?" Joe asked. "Jocked up all and down the waterfront," the man told them. "Just the same, if I was looking for a fella of that stripe, I'd check Captain Font of the Daisy K." The Daisy K again, the Hardys thought. "Was Captain Font's boat out at sea yesterday?" Frank queried. "No, she was tied up all day yesterday. I can swear to that, since I didn't leave port either." "Was the captain on board the Daisy K?" Joe asked. "Not until late in the evening." The Hardys thanked the man and hurried to the anchor of the Daisy K. As they drew closer, they spotted Captain Font on the deckhouse. Ragu was lounging at the rear of the deck. Frank and Joe halted in the gangway, and with nonchalant courtesy, Frank called, "Ahoy, the Daisy K, may we come aboard?" Captain Font leaned out the window and said harshly, "If you've got business with us, come aboard and make it snappy." When the Hardys stepped into the boat, Ragu looked up. They peered at him intensely in return, but the mate did not flinch. As Captain Font approached the Hardys, Frank decided that it was best to obtain information was through a ruse. Choosing his words carefully, he said, "We're trying to locate a couple of our friends who were going fishing with you yesterday." We didn't go fishing yesterday," Captain Font replied. "Oh, then maybe you were the captain who was in the Smith Woods yesterday," Joe broke in. Captain Font scowled. "I wasn't in any woods. Now get off my ship." The Hardys held their ground. "How about your man Ragu?" Frank asked. "Was he there?" At this, Ragu stood up behind them. "I was with Captain Font all day yesterday," he growled. "We were on ship's business." "Now you have your answers," the skipper shouted. "Get off my ship." Frank and Joe did not move quickly enough to suit the captain. His stout had arisen the other two crew members, who came up from below. They gripped the unwanted callers by the elbow and rushed them off the vessel. The Hardys were thrown forcibly to the deck. As the sailors returned to the gangplank, Frank and Joe heard one of them mutter, "It's lucky they didn't show up for the moonlit ride." The Hardys brushed themselves off and walked back to the car. As Frank drove off, he said wryly, "We found out one thing. Those men sure don't want us around." Joe nodded. "It's strange that it takes a captain, a mate, and two crew members to run a 50-foot fishing cruiser. What do you think that fellow meant about the moonlit ride? I don't know. We ought to find out if he meant tonight. There'll be a full moon. Let's try to take the sleuth out and keep an eye on the Daisy K. At home, the Hardys found a telegram from one of the paper mills. Frank read it. Joe, did you ever hear of the Mediterranean steamship line? The record of this paper company shows that the foul anchor stationery was made for them, and it's used on all their ships. It was sold through the London office. Joe had never heard of the line, but went to one of his father's bookcases and brought back a book containing ship registries. He thumbed through it, then stopped on one page. Here it is, he announced. Some of the ships ferry between New York and the Middle East. I'll check recent arrivals and departures. As Joe scanned the shipping news in the Bayport Times, he said, Here's an item on one, the Continental. She arrived in New York early this week. Her normal course would have taken her close to the coast of Bayport. Say, do you think the Continental might be the ship that's bringing aliens to the U.S.? Could be, Frank said, but it might be just a ship on which one of the gang was traveling. Determined to track down every possible clue, Frank called the Mediterranean Line New York office. He explained that the Hardys were detectives working on a government case and asked for a list of Indian passengers who recently voyaged to New York. The passenger agent assured him that it would be mailed at once, together with any other helpful information the line could give. With that cooperation, it sounds as if the company is on the up and up, Frank remarked. Just as the moon was rising that evening, Frank and Joe headed for the sleuth, which was still moored at the dock. They had left it the night before. They paused to note the progress of the repairs on their boathouse. It'll be at least 2 weeks before we can take the sleuth back, Frank commented. Yes, and the firebug hasn't been caught yet, said Joe as Frank took the wheel. Soon they were speeding out of the Bayport harbor. There were a number of islands near the inlet where they could wait for their quarry. Frank chose one that lay in the shadows, cut the motor, and turned off their running lights. I feel like one of those falcons waiting until the prey comes along, Joe said, grinning. In the moonlight, the boys could see boats moving up and down the harbor, but all of them were pressure crafts. Finally, however, Frank whispered, there's a boat with the Daisy K's line. Both boys positively identified Captain Font's craft as it chugged past them. They gave it a reasonable lead, then started after it. The chase continued for about 5 miles. Then the Daisy K slowed down. Frank cut the engine. A few minutes later, a large motor dory appeared beyond the shipping boat and pulled alongside. A rope ladder clattered over the rail of the Font's ship, and 2 men scrambled down the rungs into the dory. As the small boat pulled away towards the open sea, the Daisy K started up again, turned in a wide circle, and headed back towards Bayport. We've got to find out where that dory's going, Joe cried, and the sleuth took the chase.